Oh, and welcome to Apropos. This is the show about closure where we talk about closure with our special guest. Today we have a partial panel. We have Mia. I'm Eric. Hello. And with us, our special guest is Sean. How are you
Hey,
doing,
folks.
Sean?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Yeah. So do we just start with the questions or do we do a little chit chat at the beginning? What should we
We
do?
should probably say we Ray is still alive. Uh, he's just called out today. So
Yeah. I think the
oh
time change messed with him
yeah.
and we were supposed to have um a different guest, but they had to bow out, and so Sean was gracious enough to come on at the last minute. So thank you, Sean.
Cool. Oh, these are actually being recorded. I don't see the evidence that this is a recorded meeting. Is this different than
At
Zoom
the
more?
top, mine says custom live streaming service. You see that? So we're going live.
Oh,
We're live straight to YouTube.
Yep, people are
wow.
watching me right now. Oh,
Hmm.
we've got subtitles. I didn't know that the how is
Whoa.
this happening?
Oh, I always
Subtitles.
have subtitles on for Zoom. So
Wait,
Oh,
but
maybe
how
it's my
delightful.
subtitles are showing up for everyone.
Yes, they are.
I don't see them on mine, but I see it on the
I see it
YouTube.
on the stream, yeah.
But wait a second, we don't have subtitles. I gotta turn my
No,
subtitles on.
can I do
How
I
do
that?
you
have it
even
on because
do
I really
that?
struggle with video.
Captions.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
so, and I don't listen to podcasts. I read them through subtitles. Um, just
Yep.
because I find it really hard to focus on just audio.
I feel very much that way. My dad's always trying to make me watch videos. I will never watch a video. No one can make me watch a video. It's awful now. You get like we got a piece of furniture and it said, for instructions, for video instructions, click this QR code. Absolutely not. I have no
No.
idea if this thing is put together correctly, but it's put together the way I had to do it because I will not watch a video.
Yeah, I don't like the video thing. Like, there's no way it can be as efficient as flipping to, skipping two pages because it's just the intro stuff. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I use Windows captions, so I've got live captions on whenever I'm listening to anything. And
I
that's really
think we,
kind of nice.
I think we've all got captions. Now that I look at it, I think
Put
we're
mine
all
on.
captioned.
I'm still only seeing one set
One
on
set
this.
is like for everybody. We're just down at the bottom of the screen.
Yes. This has been the tech minutes of our show. We have to start
Yes.
we have to start every episode learning how to use the technology that we're using. So
At least the episode is going, because that's the worst is when we're still learning and we can't get it to work. Okay.
well,
Uh,
well,
but
welcome,
we're
Sean.
yeah,
Thank
welcome.
you.
Welcome.
I will say I'm really honored to be asked to be on. And I won't ask how far down the list you had to go after your guest pulled out before you got to me. So I'll just
You were the
pretend that I
first
was the second
person.
choice.
You
Oh,
were the
okay,
first
okay.
one.
And you were on our list. It was just you know,
I got bumped
we
up.
haven't
Okay.
invited you. Yeah. So, welcome.
Well, I'm
Thank
very
you for
happy to be
coming on.
on.
Yeah.
So,
And we will start by asking you, what is your editor of choice?
Mm.
well, after a long, long history of using lots of different editors, I've ended up with VS Code with Calva as the plugin, and I use Portal, so I've got visualization inside VS Code, and Joyride, so I can script VS Code with ClojureScript. Um, can't remember how long I've been using that setup. It's up on GitHub, and my .clojure files are up on GitHub as well. But I was an Emacs user many, many years ago. I actually got started with Emacs back in its 17 dot something days in the mid 80s. And I used Emacs for about a decade up until the early 19 dot releases. And then I just kind of moved on to IDEs because I was dealing with C++ and Java and stuff like that. And it was weird when I picked up Clojure, and of course everyone's going, "Oh, you should use Emacs." And so I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll download Emacs." And that was, I think, somewhere in the 23 dot cycle. And I opened it up and I'm like, "Oh my God, it hasn't changed in 30 years."
It's true.
And of course, when I've said that, people are going, "Oh, no, no, Emacs has changed a lot." I'm going, "Well, it still kind of looks the same." Um, and
Yeah.
I used Emacs with Clojure for several years. And I just found I was spending so much time, on the care and feeding of the packages and the
Mm,
config. And I was like, oh, I just want something that's more robust and more modern.
mm,
Um, and I tried a bunch of stuff. I jumped to Atom with Proto REPL. I
mhm,
saw that at Clojure West and was like, oh yeah, that's a great REPL integration. And then that got abandoned, and so I switched to Chlorine for a while, um, which was nice because it used just a socket REPL. And then I switched to VS Code because Atom kind of went bye-bye,
mm.
and was using the port of Chlorine to VS Code called Clover. But then I saw, what Calver was offering, and Calver was very actively maintained, so I jumped over to that.
Huh. So, I have a bunch of questions about this. So you talked about the care and feeding of Emacs and its
hmm
packages. Um, but did you find that switching editors so many times after uh was not like the same kind of headache?
Uh, yeah, I mean, once I got on an editor that was kind of, not the strange key chords of Emacs of old, switching editors then was pretty easy. And I switch up my config a lot anyway,
Okay.
because I kind of like to challenge myself to see if there's a more effective workflow. Um,
Hmm.
and it's been fairly stable. I mean, I program new things with Joyride and the custom REPL snippets. But the core editor and the extensions I use is all pretty stable now.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. Because I remember when VS Code was pretty new, maybe it was like a year old, people were complaining, like saying, why isn't there a closure plugin for it?
hmm
And I remember thinking, this thing is brand new. Like, there's no guarantee that that's going to be worth the investment. And Adam, we just went through a whole thing with Adam, like having to
Yeah,
switch to Adam and develop a whole plugin for that. And it seemed like, wow, why would I switch to VS Code so soon?
yeah,
But you know, that's the way things are outside of the closure ecosystem. It often moves so fast. You're already behind because
yeah. And VS Code gets a monthly update, and so, well, I mean, it gets lots of updates, but it gets a big monthly update, and so you get this huge release notes document open up once a month. And the amount of work they're pouring into it is
mm,
just incredible.
hmm.
I have the GitHub Copilot installed, and I use that quite a bit. And it's constantly getting deeper and deeper integrations. They just rolled out pull request reviews and multi-file editing in the last few months. So, Microsoft's really going kind of all in on making it a really powerful programmer's editor.
Hmm.
Now, why not IntelliJ when you started shopping for
Oh,
uh
I I've tried to like IntelliJ. Back when I was doing a lot of Java, I tried it, and I don't know, I've just never liked it. When I was really actively blogging back in, I guess, in the 2000s, maybe a bit later, uh, IntelliJ were kind of like, oh, we'll give you a free license if you review the latest version of IntelliJ. And every time I was like, okay. And I'd try it and I'd be like, I don't really want to write a bad review, but I just can't find much nice to say about it. And weirdly, I was a big fan of Eclipse, which,
Hmm.
most IntelliJ people say, oh God, Eclipse is terrible. I hate Eclipse. But I loved Eclipse. And I used it for years and years. And I did actually use Counterclockwise, the Clojure plugin for it, for a while. And what finally turned me off that was I decided to switch out my laptop for a little netbook.
Mm.
And it didn't have enough power to run Eclipse, really.
Hmm.
And so I was like, oh, I need something lighter weight. So I forget what I went to. I think I kept alternating between Emacs and other things on the netbook. And then by the time I stopped using the netbook and went back to a laptop, of course, machines are more powerful. But by that point, I'm like, I'm using Atom. It's fine.
I'll just have a browser. Uh,
Yeah, just edit my code in a browser.
It'll last. It'll be up. It'll be maintained forever. So,
it's so
Uh,
ironic. Like I grew up with the Emacs versus VI
mhm.
Firestorm um, Flame War, and people would talk about how bloated Emacs was. But
Yeah,
nowadays it's small.
yeah, yeah,
It's not as
yeah.
small as VI, but
I used to use VI back in the 80s a
uh-huh.
bit. I would use it for quick editing. I still use it occasionally for quick editing, but I
Yeah.
never got really good at it.
Uh-huh.
And one of my co-workers back then, he was just amazing with VI. And I'd see him working and I'd be like, how do you do that stuff? And he'd
Yeah.
start to explain, and I'm like, oh God, I could never remember all those, key sequences.
Yeah. So I switched to Doom Emacs, which has evil mode.
Hmm.
And with the idea of like maybe I'll pick up some of this and figure out what the fuss is about. Because I'm the same. I use VI back in the day when I was on a Unix machine and I just needed to edit some file.
Yeah.
And I got good enough that like I could operate in a terminal without a mouse and do what I needed to do. But I know like the basics. But um when Vim came out and people were talking about, oh, it's like all these composable commands and like I I just never got into it, and so I kind of missed the boat. And so I wanted to
Mm.
try it out with Doom, and I am not finding it. I'm not feeling it. I'm like it.
does it prompt you? Because like Space Max, if I don't remember the incantation, I type
Yeah.
double space and then it
Oh yeah,
throws
you
up.
can do that. You can do
Yeah.
that, but then that you're not taking advantage of the Vim keys, right? Where you're like Y447, Y3, and it
Yeah.
like, and it does something special, and because there's some language that you're expressing your command in. Um, like I found like I'm always like counting lines, like is it really faster to count these lines than to, and like I know that there's like a special thing that'll jump to a three-character sequence if you can. So now I'm like looking for what is a good three-character sequence I could
None of my
select.
business. The way I feel about that is it's none of my business.
It it's just I just find like I would be done if I could just use a mouse right now. And so I'm actually there's some other UI things that I just disagree with that I'm switching back to VS Code. So
Mm.
that's my thing now.
Yeah. I find I don't need the mouse very much with VS Code. Um, it's all keyboard driven and you can jump from window to window and pretty
Oh, that's
much
cool. Hmm.
all of the things I work with, because I mean we're Atlassian at work, so Jira and Bitbucket, and all of that I have just hotkeys bound to, so I can open up my Jira
Oh.
tickets in VS Code and I can create pull
Oh,
requests on Bitbucket and
you're
Like
like
all
a
that stuff.
super user. Yeah, I don't do that stuff. I just have
ordinary in VS
browsers.
Code.
Oh yeah, and all without a mouse. I mean, that's just all keyboard driven.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's cool. Like I know some keystrokes where like, okay, search project, right? I know that.
Mhm.
But then I'm using the mouse to like click on one of them, right? Like
Oh, okay,
I'm
yeah. Because even
you
when I
know,
pull up menus, I tend to use the arrow keys to select,
uh-huh. There you
or
go.
start
Yeah.
typing and tab and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, my mouse sits off to the side, and I mostly don't use it when I'm working in VS Code.
Hmm, that's cool. I might get to that point if I'm dedicated. I just don't have the discipline to like learn all these keystrokes.
Yeah, well, my key binding and my settings files are all on GitHub for VS Code.
Okay.
So,
Do you change a lot of the key bindings?
I don't have a huge number customized,
Okay.
um, but there's certain things I've added as convenience, particularly where things conflict.
Mm,
So there's a few things where I'm like, oh, I don't like the default binding of that, and now it's obscured something I use. So I'll change some command that I don't use much to have a different key binding. So it's not I'm
mm-hmm.
adding key bindings because I'm finding it convenient to use that command. I'm trying to get those commands out of the way,
Right.
but still accessible by a key binding if I want it.
Right. Okay, one more question. What is your favorite uh, customization that you wrote in Clojure script?
Ooh, probably the thing that I liked the most was that I was able to have a key binding that would let me do all of the following just straight away. It would open a new terminal, create an SSH tunnel to either our QA system or our production system. It would then start a REPL connection to the nREPL server that's running on a particular port there, and it would start Portal running remotely, and it would copy the Portal port file over the wire onto the target server.
Hmm,
And so then I could actually open Portal and it would be running on the remote server, but the Portal window would be open
on your
inside VS
machine.
Code. So I can use Portal for full visualization of remote data. So that's useful for debugging if I then pull up a Scratch namespace with some SQL in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm running next JDBC commands against, QA or production and having the query results come up in Portal inside VS Code. So that's probably the most complicated thing that I built with Joyride. But it just makes it really, really convenient for remote debugging.
That's yeah, that's very cool.
That's
Yeah,
all in the GitHub
that's
repo as well,
amazing.
by the way. So
Okay.
I want to go visit that. I want to be there.
Yeah, I'm like a customization minimalist. I'm
mm,
like, what can I get away with not customizing?
yeah, yeah. And I don't have a lot of Joyride scripts. The other two things that I do use quite a lot is I've got a Joyride script that if I've got a Java class highlighted in my source code or an expression that evaluates to a Java type, I have a hotkey bound to, what is it, Control Space J, which opens the Java docs in a simple browser inside
Mm,
VS Code for
mm-hmm,
that class.
mm-hmm.
And then I've got a similar one for Clojure docs where it will open a simple browser for Clojure docs inside VS Code as well.
It's got like a reference window. You don't have to page out to Google to.
Yeah, so I don't have to switch windows. I mean, that's for me is keeping the flow and the context. If I can do it all inside VS
Yeah.
Code, that makes life a lot easier. So that's why I like having Portal as an extension because it pops open the windows inside the editor rather than as a browser window.
Mm-hmm.
And I can run simple browser inside VS Code to read documentation.
Wow. Awesome.
This is a cool setup. This is, I think, the setup I've had the most questions about. We've had a
Yeah.
real diversity of
Mm-hmm.
answers. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
lots
yeah.
people are rocking some really interesting things on their machines. So
And
I'm gonna.
I'm always I always look to Sean because Sean, you're impressive because you're always trying out like the new closure releases really
Oh yeah.
early, trying out new tools, adding to your
Hmm.
workflow. So you're impressive with that.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to sort of get settled into a configuration and a tooling chain and say, oh yeah, okay, this all works for me. I'll just stick with it.
Yeah.
Because it's very disruptive to learn new tooling. Um, but
And
if
so
you
how do
can
you get
kind of
work
force
done?
yourself to,
How do you
well,
balance the
if if you're always sort of
experimentation?
changing it a little, then
Uh-huh.
it's a little bit of time here, a little bit of time there,
I see.
and you're not doing huge disruptive changes. Well, yeah, unless you change editors, which I have done several times. Um, but being able to tweak it and keeping your config in sync across multiple machines and up on GitHub, I think encourages you to think about what you're changing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you change something, see whether it works better, and you either commit it and push it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I like that VS Code will automatically sync key bindings in settings across machines.
Yeah.
Because I do work on a laptop sometimes, but I'm mostly on a desktop.
Yeah. That helps. You don't have to remember where did I make that change? Let me go find it
Yeah.
and copy it over and yeah.
We've got a
Um,
couple of questions from the chat for you.
oh, we do.
Okay.
So yeah, so Adham wants to know if you've used Rebel or Morse to explore
Oh,
Clojure.
right. Yes. When I actually got started with using Visualizer, yes, this is Bunny, at least Bunny's tail. Hi, Bunny. Yes, thank you very much. There we go. She's one of our little old ladies. She's 15, I think.
Oh
Oh
wow.
wow.
So she likes to be up on desks, and we've actually put a cat tree in the kitchen so she can get up on the counters to get to the sink for water and for her own dish of dry food up on one of
Wow,
the
very
containers.
independent and
Yeah,
self-sufficient.
and she grumbles at everyone. She's a grumpy old lady. Aren't you, sweetheart? Eh? Come here. Nope, nope, nope. She's not having any of that. If I
All
can get
right.
Tao Tao up here, he's a show cat. He'll happily be on screen. So, I'm sorry. What were we talking about?
Rebel or Morse?
Rebel, yes. Yeah, so I was at ClojureConf when they announced the Clojure 1.10 stuff with Datafy and Nav, and that's when Stu demoed Rebel as it was
Uh-huh.
then. And I was like, wow, that is super cool. And so I built some Datafy Nav stuff into Clojure Java JDBC while I was at Conj, so I could play with Rebel with you know result sets from the database. Um, and that was kind of what sowed the seed for me to write next JDBC, where that's really baked in. So yes, I was using Rebel to start with, and I got a little frustrated that it was closed source
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to modify it and it didn't have any extension points exposed. So Vlad released Reveal, and so I switched to Reveal because Reveal was open source and very, very similar. So I used that for a while, and then he went to a split um, paid free model where some features were only showed up in the paid version, and then the open source one, the free one, didn't have those features.
Mm.
Uh, and that kind of frustrated me a little because I felt again I was being cut off from some of the extensibility I really wanted. And that just happened to coincide with Portal becoming a VS Code extension.
Mm.
And so Portal is open source, it's fairly easy to work with. And I've worked with it and modified it and played with it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, this works great. It's in my editor, it's scriptable. Um, I have a bunch of REPL snippets that actually drive the Portal UI by evaluating things on the server. So I thought
Mm.
that was a really clever design in Portal that you can evaluate code on the server that sends instructions to the client, and then the client will manipulate. So I can use REPL snippets to focus on values and expand and collapse values, change the inspector view so I can cycle through different views of the data
Yeah,
without
that's my
having to.
big thing with Portal is like I find once I'm in Portal, it's great. All the data's there. It's better
Hmm.
than like doing a P print of the data and having to scroll around looking for it. But the 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 UI is like very big font. Like I don't see much data at a time, and I'm constantly like click into this vector, and then there's a subvector, and then there's a map, and then there's a key in that map that I want, and and I'm like 17 clicks in before I get to see the data that I want. And
Sounds like your problem's your data model.
well, I don't get
Oh,
to choose the data
yeah.
model,
You know,
unfortunately, but I wouldn't if the data model were simpler, maybe I wouldn't even need Portal. Like that's the
well, I mean, and
a P print
Portal
would be
can be
fine.
keyboard driven. You can drive the UI of Portal with keyboard,
See, yeah, and I
and
need to
it's
work on
Vim
that.
key bindings. So
Okay.
it's
Oh,
KJK, whatever HJKL.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so there's that. Um, and you can use Control
And
V to bring up the viewers. So pretty much everything in the Portal UI has keyboard shortcuts.
right, but I guess what I want is it to like I want to say like, hey, just pre-print it for me. And then the problem is it pre-prints it, but with the nesting level set. And so like sometimes I can't see the data because it's like 15 levels in. Um, So anyway, it's more than just I don't know if switching from mouse clicking around to keyboard and shortcuts would work. What I wanted is to say like I want to see it this way, and as it changes, just keep showing me the same view, like
Right,
the same
right.
path expanded because I'm changing stuff and I'm sending like maybe it's in an atom, and you can send an atom and
Hmm.
it like updates. Like it doesn't seem to do that. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's just not a problem I have. Maybe my data isn't so nested that it matters.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have seen that if you do expand a path and you send another value of the same structure, it expands to the same place as I recall.
Hmm.
But, and like I say, I've got a bunch of scripts for manipulating stuff. The other thing that I have is um, I have a key binding REPL snippet in Calva that pops open a little REPL input dialog,
Mm.
and I can type in some code, and I have star V, which is substituted for the value, the currently selected value in Portal. And
Oh,
so I can type in a little expression, such as, get in star V, some vector, and it puts that back into the REPL window.
that's nice.
So
that's
that's
cool.
kind of an easy way for programmatically navigating, and again, without having to use the mouse. So I can
Yeah,
transform values in Portal, I can navigate through them. And then I have the regular hotkeys for changing the viewer and expanding and collapsing different pieces in the data.
I love that.
Really like to
Yeah,
watch your workflow.
I know. You're probably like the VI guy that you knew back in the day.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
someone watches you and they're like, what is going on?
I when I have done screen share sessions, I've seen people go, wait a minute, what did you just do? And I'm like, oh, well, it's this key binding and it's backed by this joyride script. And don't look behind the curtain at all this
I have
machinery.
hundreds of
Um,
robots doing my bidding. That's what it is.
so
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. And then we have another question about what do you think of AI and the future of programming? Are we done?
ooh, that's a
Are
big,
we done
big
with it?
Okay.
question there.
I I started out as a real skeptic when ChatGPT dropped. I was like, yeah, nah, I'm not going to use that. That's rubbish. And I ignored it up until Microsoft announced that they were integrating it into Bing, because I've been a Bing user for years. I stopped using Google years ago.
Oh, we
And I was
got
like, oh, God.
Eclipse, we got Bing.
Yeah, I know, I know. Yeah, I've kind of become a bit of a Microsoft fanboy after really kind of hating Microsoft for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so they were going to introduce it into Bing, and I'm like, oh God, I suppose I've got to learn how this stuff works. So I started experimenting with ChatGPT, and I was like, well, I'll ask it stuff about something I know about and is very factual based and see how it does. And I picked English opera, English language opera as the
Huh.
the thing. And within the first 15 minutes of chatting to it, it had completely hallucinated who wrote certain operas. When I when I tried to drill into that, it then hallucinated on which play they were based on, and then argued that a critic, a critic, had actually written the play, which was not true. And I'm like, wow, this is so inaccurate. This is terrible. And so for a while, I was like, oh God, AI just hallucinates. You can't trust it. It's not useful. But when Microsoft integrated it into Bing, what they did was they used RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. Um, and so it takes your question, whatever you type in, your prompt, turns it into a bunch of search queries, runs the search queries against Bing, gets the results back, summarizes them, and then gives you this answer with footnotes. So you can actually see straight away, oh, here are the websites it got the information from. And so at that point, you can go, well, I don't trust this website and I don't trust that one, so I don't trust the answer. Or, oh, yes, those are all, good websites. I'll trust its answer. So I began to start using it more and more, and then forced myself to only use AI instead of doing searches.
But do you
Mhm.
feel
And
like you're
so
just you're fact checking this thing? So is it really
to
more?
some extent, but what I found was that when I search for something complicated, I get my page of search results and I'm clicking into like the first 5 entries anyway and reading pages of stuff to determine whether it answers what I need. And at least with the AI, it's doing the summarization for me and it can usually pull the answer out and saves me the time of having to formulate the right search query, um,
Mhm.
read multiple pages of results and
Just to
multiple
learn that it
pages. Yeah,
wasn't, you didn't find what you were looking
yeah.
for.
And so the time saving outweighs the fact checking because once it's found the data for you and it's given you links, you can click through quickly and drill down to exactly what it is that you're trying to get the answer to. So I don't find the fact checking onerous, and I find the benefit of it taking my rambling question and turning it into dedicated search queries and summarizing that to be a huge time save. Um, so then fast forward to it starting to pop up in uh, VS Code. And at first, Copilot wasn't very good with Clojure, um, and it still hallucinates parentheses all over the place. But it's gotten much better. And it now exposes, I think, 5 different models you can use. So you can use GPT, you can use Claude, you can use the OpenAI stuff. So there's a menu of models. And I'm finding more and more that I can now stay in my editor, uh, ask it questions about tech that I'm not using all the time, often Linux administration questions, because I've never been an admin person. And it can come up with the command, and I can look at it and go, yeah, that looks about right. Click, execute. And it pops it into a terminal and runs it. So that sort of stuff saves me a lot of time. And now, as it's getting better with the code suggestions uh, and the ability to do inline editing and even multi-file editing, I'm beginning to use it more for actual sort of code stuff as well. Yeah, I previously used it just for kind of generating tests, but now I'm actually starting to use it to do refactoring sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, I still find it a little clumsy, and I haven't gotten into the habit of using it with voice, which is where
Hmm.
I think the real benefits come, that you can just talk to your editor,
You
and it
just put
will,
your feet up and you're just like, oh, can you move that to
yeah,
above
yeah,
there and then change the name of that function for me? And
yeah. And I've
Computer.
actually tried to do that, and it's really kind of amazing to watch your editor turn your spoken commands into actions, and then it says, okay, this is what I'm going to do to your code. Is this acceptable? And you're like, yeah,
Hmm.
go ahead, run my tests. Um,
Can you ask it? Can you tell it something like, sorry, because I've used Copilot, but like I haven't done, I know there's now a chat thing where you can like
mhm,
ask it questions.
yeah,
Haven't used that yet. But can you do stuff like, hey, do a standard TDD workflow. Make a small change. I'm going to tell you a big change. You turn it into little changes, run the tests at each stage, and stop if something fails. Like, can you do something like that?
it's getting to that point. I
Okay.
mean, they've now got agent modes. There's a lot of stuff I haven't kept up with yet. I sort of try and keep apprised in some of the AI channels on Slack. Um, and there are some people who are like way, way down that line.
Mm,
In fact, at Conj this year, there's at least one, I think there were two unsessions about AI assisted coding, and then a couple of other sessions in the main conference about using AI to simplify developers'
mm,
lives.
mm-hmm,
So, sort of coming back to the original question, I think I think we're going to get used to using it as a tool, and it'll be just another tool in our toolbox, but it will increasingly allow us to do higher level and more powerful things. Um, I think the danger with it lies uh, in the fact that if you're very inexperienced, you can get it to build software for you, but you won't have a sense of how that software works.
mm,
And so I do think there's a real danger that as more and more people use AI for code generation and then for making changes to that generated code, the code is going to get much more complicated faster than it would from just junior developers figuring it out.
Well, and
Whereas
then
I
you
think the advanced developers, senior developers got much more of a handle on what's a good approach. And so, if Copilot or whatever suggests, well, we're going to move this to a function, we're going to do this with it. And a more senior developer will go, no, 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 that's not the right way to do that. This is the reusable part that we should be focusing on. And, these are the parameters we want instead. So you've got to still know how to write software to use these things. Um, but I mean, you can get a quick proof of concept knocked up with this stuff now, even in tech you have no idea about.
mm.
Um, Gene,
this is maybe a
oh,
natural.
Gene Kim.
Gene Kim, thank you. Uh, I mean, Gene has been using it quite a lot and working with Steve Yeager at it. And some of the threads that he's produced, some of the write-ups have been really interesting in terms of how much he's been able to get done in just a couple of hours to build out a working, perfectly satisfactory solution to a problem that he'd wanted to solve for ages, but just never found the time to sit down and spend a week or two learning how to use all the tech and then wiring it all together. And he said, you don't have to learn the intricacies of the tech because the AI can figure a lot of that stuff out. And it
Mm,
was some video editing and captioning tool that allows him to highlight parts of a transcript of a talk and then essentially have the video edited to just the highlighted sections of the transcript and it reapplied.
mm.
And so he's creating highlight reels of conference talks using just the transcripts where he's taken notes and highlighted stuff. And he built that in a couple of hours just by mostly voice commands.
Yeah, I could see that taking like some of the burden of like I haven't used a Java GUI library in ages. Like I'd really have
Right.
to start over from like how do I even build a GUI in Java? But if it could just build the GUI for me, and
Mm-hmm.
just say like I could write the code that, when you click the button, this is what it does, but like, you know, to me, it's like if I want to make a little GUI application, like, oh man, that is a 2 week project because I'm going to be sitting in the
Right.
docks for most of the time.
Yeah.
What's he gonna
Yeah.
do with that time? I don't know. I feel like you're missing out on a journey of discovery. Like
What
no,
am I gonna
like
do with
seriously, like
that
what's the
time?
point of living? Right? Like, like you're talking about like, oh, I'm trying to find the answer to this question, and now there's no more irrelevant sources that I have to sift through, but then you're missing out on what those irrelevant sources are teaching you.
Their character
Oh,
building, is
there's
that
a
what you're
whole
saying?
Yeah. Well, and I
there's
think it depends on whether your goal is to learn stuff or build something.
yes.
And sometimes you don't have the luxury of time to learn a bunch of stuff. Um, I mean, one of the things the Pragmatic Programmer book says, learn a new language every year, which I think every year is a bit challenging, but every couple of years I think is reasonable. But what I always struggle with is what am I going to build with some new language I've learned?
Hmm.
But for me, that's a learning exercise. And what I want is to be able to learn the language and learn the tooling rather than just randomly build stuff. But if I specifically wanted a utility built, I think I could very well justify just getting the AI to build most of it under my direction.
But you
Um,
could because you are an experienced developer who takes the time to do these things otherwise.
if it's entirely within my wheelhouse, and this goes back to my comment about things like Linux administration, I don't want to learn to be a Linux administrator. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
there are people who love that stuff, and that's great. And I've worked with people who just know so much stuff about Linux admin because they have Linux systems of their own at home and they tinker with them all the time. Networks and stuff like that. I have zero interest in networks. But every now and then, I'm going to need to do something with networks. And if I can say to the AI, you know, here's what I'm trying to achieve, here's the environment infrastructure, help me. And it
Yeah.
says, oh, here's the three network commands you need to run. I'm like, great, you've just saved me, hours of digging in docs and a lot of frustration. Um, so,
But
but we
what
have to,
excuse?
as developers, be able to figure out what the trade-offs are.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And what the product is,
Yeah.
if the process is the product, then that's different.
If the
Then
product
Yeah.
is
there are some
you,
things
I'm
where,
going through
yeah.
this process to learn to be different. Yeah,
Yeah, if the
you
product
need
is
to do it.
me, yeah, if the
Yeah.
product
I
is me, then I don't want to use AI for that. But if the product is the thing that I need to get to the product that I'm trying to make, then I could see that.
Yeah. And
it's
if it can
like
tell you the parameters to a command line to save you looking it up, that's it's going to get there quicker. It's stuff like that. It's like, do I really need to know, what is it, the FM JPEG, is it? Or something.
FFmpeg.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing, which, has thousands of command line arguments and no one really knows them all and knows how to use it. And yeah, if I want to do something with it, I'm going to use AI because I don't want to have to learn all of that. I just want it to manipulate some image or video or something.
Paula
It seems like
asks a
it serves as a natural extension to an IDE. I
Yeah.
think it's healthy to think about it as an extension of
mm,
tooling.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, for sure, for sure. Paula asks a really good question about maybe just brings up the dilemma. Uh, we're closurists, we pride ourselves on um, being concise and having these powerful tools that let
Hmm.
us reduce boilerplate because we're working at a better level of abstraction. But with AI, it seems like you can just speak English and now you're getting, like, let's say JavaScript written for you. And you don't write the boilerplate, it's written for you.
Mm.
And so, like, does this remove the need for better languages? Because that's one thing I'm worried about. It's like we're just
Mm.
gonna stop looking for better languages. We're just gonna keep trying to make the AI write better JavaScript. Um,
Mm.
and it's similar. Like
Point.
is here's a similar problem. Like when I have to write Bash, I'm terrible at Bash. I've always Googled it. Like how do I do an if in Bash? Like it's really that bad where I'm
Hmm.
like, because it's usually not the if. It's like, how do I tell if a file exists? Oh, it's dash E. Like just randomly put a command line argument in front of and like behind nothing. Like why would I do that? So, um, uh, I just always Google it. Now I would probably ask an AI to write it,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I don't mind using Babashka
Hmm.
and like writing it all myself and looking in the docs for Babashka because it's Clojure and it's a nicer language than
Yeah.
Bash.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but like maybe we're at that point where like we could just write everything in Bash because the AI is going to do it for us.
Yeah. But I think there are always going to be programmers who want to actually program.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I've been doing open source work on and off for about 30 years, over 30 years now. And when my job involves less programming, I tend to do more open source work because I really enjoy working on software. Um, and so if you are someone who enjoys learning this stuff and writing this software, you're still going to do it. I
Hmm.
mean, you'll use AI for the stuff that you're not terribly good at or don't know very well, but you'll still enjoy writing code. And the one thing that, you know, pretty much everyone says about Clojure is it's really enjoyable to write software.
Hmm.
Um, so the core of the Clojure community that got there because they like Clojure is going to still use Clojure. They may use AI as well, but they're still going to use Clojure. And I think there are always going to be plenty of languages, and the people who invent new languages are always going to be around and they will invent new languages. Um, so
So
it's a matter of finding the right balance because there's only so much software that those folks can write, and there's an awful lot of software that needs to get written.
I think
yeah, and
So
it's a part of our tooling,
yeah,
then in and when we have an understanding of what it's good at and what it's not good at, and it assists us in our work instead of doing the work for us, that's because it can't do the work for us. It doesn't
right.
know, we have, I think it was, yeah, Bobby in chat says, the code generator doesn't know your constraints.
Yeah.
Uh, and I, it's, I, I like talking to you about this because you are not someone who, I have this idea in my head of someone who's reliant on these AI tools,
Mm,
and uh, it's good to talk about and to envision us where this becomes most sustainable is where it is a part of our tooling and where it
right.
is a part of our healthy workflows in writing good software that you are still writing, that we are still writing, but we have this tooling that I'm sure people were having similar conversations about IDEs.
Oh
sure.
yeah, I mean this goes back quite a while. I mean the one thing that I was just about to tell this little story. Back in England, I want to say it's early 90s, maybe mid 90s. A friend of mine who was a fairly brand new junior programmer um, got a job with a company that was doing a lot of C++, plus plus, and they were using the Visual C++ plus plus environment. And he was actually able to build all sorts of software almost completely automatically. I mean, he would literally be, clicking and dragging and dropping.
Hmm.
But then he would get to the little bits of code that needed to live in the methods, and then he would struggle because, some of this stuff was beyond his level. The rest of it, all the complex UI, all of the interaction code, all of the class infrastructure, all of that could be generated. And
Hmm.
he could build UIs and build tooling, but he actually came around my house, with this thing he was doing at work, and he said, I really don't have the first idea of what needs to go in this method. He said, and it's really only this one method I've got left to write in the entire piece of work. And so, we sat down and I tried to talk him through from first principles how he would figure out how to write the code. But it was really interesting because he built all this UI and all this interaction and these forms. And I was like, I would have no idea how to build any of that if I was trying to do it manually. And I didn't know the
Mm.
Visual C++ environment well enough to be able to use it effectively. So he'd become really, really effective with a tool that generated most of the boilerplate code. And there was a big push back in the day for, 5GLs and code generation and these much higher level, much more abstract systems that would allow you to build things without, a lot of the lower level bits and pieces. So I kind of, because I've been around in IT for so long, I kind of look at the AI systems as much the same. Um, they know more stuff. They've got access to more resources and they can help you along when you get stuck.
I feel more optimistic.
Nice.
I like, yeah, I imagine, yeah, that it was very much it's the continuation of a conversation that we've been having for as long as people have been trying to write things that assist in code writing productivity.
Yeah.
I I do want to so I have a friend that I've mentored in programming, and he is addicted to AI. I'm just gonna put it that way. He
Mm.
If he gets stuck, he just jumps right into the AI and asks it, write a function to finish this for me. And it's a crutch and it keeps him from learning because he
Mm.
doesn't have to face the challenges of actually changing how you think and learning the new knowledge that you need to get through the problems. So I do worry that people are gonna like forget, another generation or two and they haven't had to do it. I mean, it's similar to how like kids might not learn how to do arithmetic because they have calculators, right? And it's only the the effort of teachers to force them to do arithmetic without using a calculator and have to actually memorize the multiplication tables and the addition tables so that they can keep that in their head. Like,
I'm hearing a lot of waving your cane around, going, get off my lawn.
I don't know. As
Um,
a certified hater, is it really that different from asking Stack Overflow and uh,
It
porting them?
totally is. It totally is
Okay.
because so like I remember he was I was asking him to like do a problem. I was like, just let me see how you work. And he was starting to write. I was like, here's a problem, write a function that does this. And he couldn't do the syntax for a function. He would type function. This was in JavaScript. So he'd do function and then he put parentheses around the name. And I
Oh,
was like,
sounds like he
is
wants to
this?
write Clojure.
Well, he did. He did. So he was getting confused between the two. But like,
mm.
imagine he was in an interview and
Mm.
someone was like, write a function to add two plus two, and he couldn't even get the syntax right. And it's like that kind of thing where like you're not showing yourself as like a skillful coder doing this.
Well,
And
yeah,
like maybe one day in like the interviews they won't mind. They'll be like, "Oh, if you can autocomplete your way to the end of this problem, go for it."
well, and I've been very outspoken about the interview process. I mean, I've
Mm.
been railing against the way companies do interviews for 20 some years. I've been a
Hmm.
hiring manager for about 30 years. Um, and I do not do coding tests. I do not do whiteboard tests. I don't do take-home projects. Because in the interview context, none of that is how you work in reality. You don't just sit in a room and answer questions. You
Right.
don't just draw on a whiteboard. That's just not how you work as a developer. Um, and I'm against take-home projects for different reasons to do with equity and opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think that our interviewing process is plain old broken. I
Mm,
mean, we put people through these dreadful interviews, um, and they don't really tell you whether someone's good at the job. They just tell you that someone is good at passing the interview.
mm,
And so, if someone can't get the syntax right in an interview, I would not necessarily think, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, we won't hire them. I would think, oh, well, the interview is not real programming, and if they were doing real programming, they'd figure it out and they'd get it done. What I want to hear in an interview is more about how they think about problems and how they approach projects and how they
mm,
interact with other people. And so that's what I tend to ask, is, I will drill into, what the project that they enjoyed the most. Why did they enjoy it? Did anything go wrong? How did they handle that? What was the worst project you worked on? Tell me a bit about that. Why did you not enjoy it? If you ran into this conflict, how did you resolve it? So
mm.
I'm much more interested in that aspect because you can send someone on a training course to learn the syntax. That's trivial.
But
The
how would
syntax
you
is trivial.
feel? How would you feel if you're interviewing Eric's protege and the way that he thinks about the problem is, I need to know the syntax because I'm going to ask Chad.
Right. And then at that point, if that's what they're saying in the interview, that, oh, well, I don't know the language well enough, I rely on AI, then I'm going to say, okay, that's a problem. But I'm not going to ask them about syntax because, that's a trivial aspect of being able to program. Um, and, I've hired and cross-trained people. So,
Mm.
you know, them not knowing your sort of home-based tech is fine if you're going to be training them to do things the in-house way anyway.
Mm,
Um, and one of the things that I do ask in an interview is I will ask them, why they chose their primary tech. You know, oh, you're working in JavaScript primarily. Tell me about that. Tell me, what made you choose JavaScript? And then I will ask them things like, is there something you'd change in JavaScript? Is there something that, you find really frustrating? And if you could change the language, what would you do? And questions like that can be very illuminating.
Hmm.
And I've had people say, oh, no, I wouldn't change anything at all about JavaScript. JavaScript's great. And it's like, okay, then sorry,
Have
you
you
just
ever
failed the
used
interview.
JavaScript?
Yeah, yeah. And but I've had people come back with all sorts of very rational reasons for, problems with toolchain, Babel and
Mm,
Webpack and all this stuff, or, just how brittle the ecosystem is, all these sort of things. And it's like, okay, they've experienced real pain
mhm,
using it and they
mhm,
understand that these are pain points in the ecosystem. And maybe they have some pet feature they don't like. But if they can argue why they don't like it and
mhm,
why they avoid it, again, you're learning a lot about how they think as a programmer. Um, so to me, that's very important. That's much more important than, do they use AI to write a function? Because if they're able to write good code, maintainable code, the code reviews are clean, I don't really care how they write it.
Sure, but this guy was definitely not able to do that. Just
But that's because he's also not able to think about how to approach problems.
that's right.
And
You
he's
would have
getting
caught
bogged
it.
down with the
Yeah,
syntax. Yeah.
yeah,
The
So,
question is, are they using AI as an effective tool?
right.
yeah, yeah. Are you using it as an effective tool or are you using it because you just don't have any knowledge, but you can get it to give you something that works?
So how do you th I've and we haven't really gotten to any of the
Our
questions except
questions. Yeah.
one.
Just the
But
editing.
I want to think I want to know more about because interviews are very broken,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so if you spend a lot of time thinking about them, I want to know sort of how do you fix the tech interview? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, I would get everyone to do interviews the way I do them, and the way I've been doing them for about 30 years. Um, I have a mind map that guides me through the questions I like to ask, but I mean, I've given you some idea of a couple of the things that I always ask. And I've used that mind map almost unchanged for a long time because it's very high level and it's got a lot of scope for drilling down into things. But I would do away with the coding tests. I would find a way to train the people who are going to do interviews in how to do interviews, because that's one of the big problems. You take a bunch of engineers who bash away at a keyboard all day and interact
Mm,
with each other, and you stick them in a room with a stranger, and you go, okay, interview this person. And you
right.
don't tell them
There's
anything
no
about how to do
training,
it.
no,
There's no
yeah,
training. We don't
yeah,
train people to do interviews. And so they're like, well, this happened to me in the interview, I'll do it to them. And so you get this
right.
horrendous perpetuation of bad interview technique because that's all almost everyone's ever known. But I mean, I go back to one of the first jobs. I was a hiring manager in the beginning of the 90s. And one of the people in the department was absolutely dead set on coding tests. And I said, fine, I will write up a coding test, you know, and we can use it in interviews. I said, but if you are going to make candidates pass this test before you hire them, you should test everyone in the department and see where they fall on it because you want to get a
See if
baseline
you can do
score.
it.
And he went, yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm like, I know how this is going to go. And every single developer at mid-range to junior failed the test.
No,
Wow.
And I knew that
this
was going to happen. And it was stuff that,
Did he fire them all?
no, but he then stopped using the coding test
Oh, okay, okay.
because he realized that it wasn't a good measure of people's skill. And he'd looked at the test and gone, oh, yeah, this is pretty straightforward. But he was a seasoned developer who'd moved into management. And the only people who passed were the senior developers who'd moved into management and weren't doing a lot of code anymore. It was a very hierarchical department. Um, but they had all agreed that this is stuff that junior developers should know, which I thought was really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and so,
So they didn't
they were
even
like,
know what their own people didn't know.
no, no,
Mm,
because they hadn't had a coding test, but they had an idea of what a coding test should be for everyone, and they were going to instigate it and make it happen.
hmm.
And
well,
of
and
course,
clearly,
now, a lot of these
if
companies
you
have these coding tests that they use, and they're like, well, we've used it for, 1,000 candidates, we'll use it for the next 1,000 without really thinking about it.
and if their developers were successful without knowing any of these things, uh,
Yep.
then
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
how.
So, the test isn't a realistic reflection of what they expect people to do.
Yeah. So what? So you have this mind map.
Hmm.
We are well over time.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're not going to get to our good question.
Yeah,
I mean, not that this wasn't a great discussion,
No,
but
we should
we should
have you
skip.
on again at some point to answer the rest of the
Yes, yes,
questions.
yes, yes.
let's jump to the questions. Go on.
Um, but no, we gotta go. Uh, I have a meeting in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I do have a hard cap in about an hour and a half because I have an eye appointment.
Maybe
You
you
know,
have enough time
I'm
to
I'm
answer the
happy
monad question.
I'm happy to chat for another hour, I mean,
But so how do you fix the interview? I really I so
yeah,
the
it's
coding
really
test.
hard because it's you've got to have a cultural change in these companies.
Mhm.
Um, and I think Google actually did at one point say, we did a lot of, running the numbers and looking at the history of everyone we've hired. And we do kind of realize that our interview process doesn't necessarily correspond to all the best people. Um, so there was a sort of a bit of an admission there, but they were kind of
They
like, but
didn't
we don't know what
change.
else to do.
Yeah.
Um, and so it didn't change. And a lot of other companies, of course, have mimicked this because they're like, oh, those big tech companies, they're so successful. It must be their interview process, hiring the best people. We'll do the same thing. And we've got to change that. We've got to change the culture around it. We've got to get, we've got to break the cycle of people doing the same to candidates they interview that was done to them.
Mhm.
And I mean, I had a job interview when I was still living in England. I was flown out to a job interview in Dallas, Texas. with a company that I loved their products. I thought they were really interesting. And the morning of the interview was fine. That was, pretty high level. How do you think? How do you interact with people? And then after lunch, it got increasingly narrowed down to the coding test. And they literally stuck me in a room with a PC with Visual C++ on it and the manuals and the spec. And there was no, internet access to go look up stuff. It was just an isolated PC. And they're like, okay, we'll be back in 45 minutes to see how you've done. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. I mean, this is not how developers work. So I'm like, I'm not going to do this. I poked at VS Code VS Code, Visual Studio, Visual C++ for a bit. And I was like, nah, this is not how I work. I don't like this. So I just got up and walked out. And I said to the front desk person, he said, if, I don't know, Joe, whatever his name was, asks for me, tell him I've left. I've gone to the airport early and I'm flying home. And she was like, oh, okay. And so I got my taxi. I went back to the airport. I flew home. And 2 days later, I got a phone call. And he said, obviously you didn't like our interview process. And I said, yeah, I'm happy to talk about it if you want. And so we had this big, long conversation about their hiring attitude, which I didn't like, which was, oh, we only hire the best people. We're going to make you prove you're one of the best people. And then the structure of the interview and the coding thing. And I said, that's not how your engineers work. And he went, no. I said, well, why do you make candidates go through that when that's not how they're going to work? And again, he was like, we don't know how to do anything else. And I said, well, I'm not about to be put through that. I just think it's wrong. And he said, yeah, we still want to hire you. And I said, no, no, we've just
No.
had an hour-long discussion about the attitude and the way you treat your staff. And I don't want to work in that environment. And, in some ways we've got to confront it and we've got to say, you have to change how you're doing this. You've got to come up with something better. But I don't know how to get enough leverage to force companies to change because they're
Do you
comfortable.
have
They get so many applications, they don't care really whether the interview process works as long as it's fast.
do you have like I'm in your blog. Uh do you have you written up your interview process? Uh
Not on the blog. I've discussed it multiple times on pretty much every uh, chat medium I'm on and forums and stuff. And I've posted the mind map as a PDF several times. Um,
It might be
so
nice
that,
to have a reference document for people who are thinking about how they would do their interviews.
hmm.
Um,
Yeah, if
And
you send me
I
a
have
link, I'll add it to the chat, to the
yeah,
description.
yeah.
yeah,
And
that's what I was
on a
looking for one.
one-on-one basis, I have actually had people come back and say, yeah, we looked at your mind map, we've listened to you talk about it, we do interviews differently now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, I feel like I've had some success in changing a few people's attitudes to it. Um, but I don't scale to tackling Google or Facebook.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there aren't enough of me. Um,
It's going to become a
so
lot more
yeah,
important as tooling changes, right? And as tooling becomes more complex and you're looking for the necessary thoughtfulness to use
yeah,
that complex tooling,
yeah,
that's it becomes more important.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we've got a request to a link to that mind map.
Yeah. I'll make sure it's online somewhere and I'll link to it.
All right, thank you. Uh we have to close out. Uh so you're
Oh,
not
we
going
didn't
to
even get to the other questions.
No, no, we still don't know your closure story. We haven't forced you to define a monad or a transducer. Uh, do you
We'll
have
have to have you
anything
on
you'd
again.
like to plug? Is there anything that you would like to see in the links and the episode description?
No, it falls to me to make sure you have a link to the mind map, but no, other than that, I'm good.
And who would you like to see on?
Ooh, I think it would be very interesting for you to interview Joachim Tengstrand, the guy behind Polylith, um, because I think he has some really interesting thoughts on software development and software architecture.
Great. We'll put him on the list and we'll probably tap you again at
Oh,
some point
I
because
I'd love to come back on and talk more, especially to answer
yeah,
the other questions.
yeah, no,
Yeah. I can't
thank
believe we
you.
only did one question. That was great.
I
Started
think
with
it's
the
something for
editor.
Thank
the
you so
audience as
much.
well.
It was very short notice. So,
Hey, no
Thank
problem.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
all right.
All right. Take care, everybody. Subscribe.
Thank you.
Tell your friends. Bye.